Hey, I'm Nathan, and before we start, I want you to think about a piece of furniture in your house that nobody has moved in years. Not a couch you shove around when you vacuum. Something heavier, something you'd need help with. Because the strangest thing about the story I'm about to tell you is that the evidence sat 6 inches under a sleeping child for 3 years, and the only reason nobody found it is that nobody flips a mattress. We buy them, we sleep on them, we complain about them, and then one day, we pay 2 men in work gloves to carry them down the stairs and out of our lives. In this story, one of those men got halfway down the staircase, set his end on the tread, and made the sign of the cross. He told the father of the house to flip it over himself. Then he went and stood in the driveway, and he would not come back inside. What I love about this story, and I mean love in the way you love a story that keeps you up, is that it's really about listening. The man at the center of it repaired pianos for a living. He spent his whole adult life leaning over strings, hearing things other people couldn't hear, and he still missed the sound of his own house. Stay with me to the end, because the way he finally answered it is the most patient, most surgical piece of revenge I have ever put into words. Beckett Halloran could tell you what was wrong with a piano from the hallway. It was not a party trick, though people treated it like one. It was 31 years of practice that began the summer he turned 10, when his father put a tuning hammer in his hand in the back room of Halloran Piano Works in Kittering, Ohio, and told him that a piano is just a wooden box with 230 pieces of steel trying to tear it apart, and the only reason it makes music instead of noise is that somebody keeps checking. Beck's father, Amos, had hands like carved oak and a way of going silent for 10 minutes in the middle of a job. And when Beck was 15 and asked him what he was doing during those silences, Amos said, "Listening for the thing that isn't happening." Beck did not understand that sentence for 26 years. He understood it eventually. He understood it on a Tuesday, at the bottom of his own stairs, with his hands shaking so hard he had to press them flat against his thighs. By 41, Beck ran the shop alone. His father had died of a stroke in the loading bay 6 years earlier, mid-sentence, holding a bass string, and Beck had buried him and reopened the following Monday, because that is what Amos would have called sensible. The sign out front still said Halloran and Son, and Beck had never had the heart to change it, even though the son on the sign was now the father in the story. He rebuilt uprights nobody else would touch. He restrung a 1928 grand for a Lutheran church 2 counties over, and refused payment because the pastor's wife had taught him algebra. He was 6'1", and built like a man who moved heavy objects for a living, which he was, and he had a way of speaking slowly that people sometimes mistook for slowness. It was not slowness. It was the habit of a man who had learned that if you wait 3 seconds before you answer, the room tells you something. He met Delaney Quist at a wedding in Sandusky, where he had been hired to tune a rented spinet, and she had been hired to arrange 400 stems of eucalyptus. She was quick and bright and funny in a way that made other people feel funny too, and she had an answer for everything, and Beck, who had answers for almost nothing outside of wood and wire, found that restful. They married in 14 months. Ellis came 2 years after that, a small, serious boy with his father's heavy hands and his mother's fast eyes, and for a while the house on Wexley Street was exactly the house Beck had wanted since he was a kid, which is to say, it was loud in the good way. Ellis learned to walk holding the leg of a Steinway. At 3 he could tell a sharp note from a flat one, and Beck, who knew better than to make a big deal of it, made an enormous deal of it anyway. The quiet started when Ellis was 7, not all at once. It came the way a soundboard cracks, which is to say invisibly, from the inside, and you don't hear it until the whole instrument goes dull. He stopped asking to come to the shop on Saturdays. He stopped finishing sentences and started letting them trail off, and when Beck asked him a question, he would look at his mother first. That last part was the thing Beck kept snagging on, the way you snag on a wrong note you can't locate. The boy checked with Delaney before he answered his own father. Delaney had an explanation, and her explanations were always good, which is a thing Beck would think about later for a very long time. Ellis wasn't sleeping. That was the whole of it. He had night terrors, she said. He was up at 2, at 3, wandering, and she was the one who dealt with it because Beck slept like a felled tree and always had. She'd taken him to a specialist. She had a folder. She had a chart with little stickers. She had, she said, a system. And the system was working. And what the system required more than anything was that nothing about Ellis's room change, because change was the enemy of a sleep protocol. Beck, who had never in his life been the parent who managed the doctors, said okay. He said okay for 3 years. The mattress became a fight in February. It was a cheap foam thing that had come with a bed frame from a warehouse store, and it had developed a crater on the left side and a hard ridge down the middle. And Ellis was 10 now and getting tall and slept curled at the very edge of it like a dog on a windowsill. Beck said one morning, entirely casually, that he was going to order the boy a real bed. Delaney put down her cup and said no, and there was something in the way she said it that made Beck look up. She recovered fast. She was always fast. She said the specialist had been very clear about environmental consistency, that they were 9 weeks into a new phase, that a new mattress could set them back to 0. And did he want to go back to 2 in the morning, because she was the one who would be up? He let it go. He brought it up again in April, and got a longer version of the same answer, delivered with more warmth and a hand on his arm. In June she cried. In July she got angry, and told him that this was exactly like him, that he wanted to fix things with a credit card because fixing things with a credit card is easier than being present, and that landed, because there was a piece of it that was true. And Delaney had a gift for wrapping one true thing around 9 false ones so tightly you couldn't get a fingernail under the edge. In August, Beck stood in the doorway of his son's room at 11 at night and watched him sleep, and thought that the boy's face looked wrong somehow. Too still, like a room with the strings taken out, and he told himself he was tired. What finally moved him was not an argument. It was a receipt. Delaney's mother, Verity, had a birthday, and Beck went into the hall closet for the wrapping paper and knocked over a shoebox, and among the spilled contents was a folded slip from a pharmacy 2 towns over, not the one they used, made out in Delaney's name, dated 11 months earlier. He didn't understand a word of what was on it. He put it back in the box, but it sat in him the way a false beat sits in you. And 8 days later, when Delaney left for a 4-day continuing education conference in Columbus, Beckett Halloran picked up his phone, called a furniture warehouse in Ashtabula, and bought his son a bed. The delivery window was Tuesday, 8 to noon, and they came at 9:40. There were 2 of them. The younger one was maybe 24, all elbows, wearing a back brace over a shirt that said Sarmiento and Sons, moving in a cracked heat press, and he introduced himself as Kip and immediately asked whether there were pets. The older one didn't say anything at all at first. He was somewhere near 60, silver at the temples, thick through the shoulders in the way of men who have carried furniture for 40 years and will carry it for 10 more, and he wore his work gloves tucked in his belt like a farrier. His name, stitched on the pocket, was A. Sarmiento, Amato. He shook Beck's hand and looked at the staircase and made a small sound of professional displeasure, because the staircase turned twice, and turning staircases are the enemy. They brought the new bed up first, a real inner spring with a proper border, and it went in clean. Ellis's room was on the 2nd floor at the front, and Beck had stripped it that morning, the sheets in the wash, the little chart with the stickers still taped to the closet door. Then they went to take the old one out. Kip took the head, Amato took the foot, and they got it up on its edge in the doorway. And that was the first moment anything was strange, because Amato stopped. Beck was 3 steps below them on the landing, holding the newel post, and he saw the older man's face change. Not shock, not yet. Something more like recognition, the expression of a man who has just heard a word in a language he grew up with. Amato said something under his breath in Spanish. Then he shifted his grip, and they came down 4 steps, and he stopped again. And this time he lowered his end onto the tread, slowly, the way you'd set down something sleeping, and he stepped back until his shoulders hit the wall. Kip said, "Amato, what?" Amato didn't answer him. He was looking at the underside of the mattress, which was tipped now at maybe 50 degrees, and the hall light was hitting it flat, and Beck, from where he stood, could see only that the pale ticking was not blank. It was gray with something. It looked, from below, like a wall in a bus shelter. Then Amato Sarmiento took off his cap, and he crossed himself. Forehead, chest, left, right. He did it twice, and he said, in accented English, very quietly, the way you'd talk in a hospital, sir, "Flip it over yourself. We'll be outside." Beck said, "What is it?" and the man wouldn't look at him. He said, "Sir, I have 4 grandchildren. Please, flip it over yourself." He picked up his cap, and he went down past Beck without touching the walls, and Kip followed him with his mouth open, and Beck heard the screen door bang, and through the front window he saw the 2 of them standing at the tailgate of the truck, and Amato had his hands on top of his head, elbows out, the way men stand at the scene of a wreck. Beck went up the 4 steps. He put his hands on the mattress. It weighed nothing. That was the thing he would remember. This cheap foam slab, that had been the most defended object in his marriage, weighed almost nothing, and he turned it over onto the landing, and the hall light came down on it, and he read the first line, and then he read the second line, and his knees went. It was writing. It was his son's handwriting, and it covered the entire underside of the mattress, edge to edge, in the fat gray strokes of a carpenter's pencil. The flat red one from the shop with the wide lead that Ellis had asked for when he was 7, and Beck had given him without a second thought, because a kid should have a pencil. It was 3 years of writing. It was small at the top, near the head of the bed, where the earliest entries were, cramped and careful, a 7-year-old's block letters. It got bigger as it went down and out toward the edges, and by the last third it was fast and slanted, and pressed so hard the paper of the ticking had furred up under the strokes. There were dates, hundreds of dates. There were tally marks in groups of 5, whole columns of them, running down the left side like something scratched on a cell wall. There were drawings, a pair of boots, drawn over and over, boots with a squared toe and 4 eyelets, 20 or 30 of them scattered across the surface like a wallpaper pattern. There was a shape that took Beck a long moment to recognize as the front of a van. There was a rectangle with a cross in the corner, and in the middle of it, in letters 4 inches high, gone over so many times the graphite shone, the sentence that put Beckett Halloran on the floor of his own hallway, with his back against the banister. "If you find this, I am not asleep." Underneath it, smaller, "Count to 90 and he's gone." And underneath that, in the careful hand of a much younger child, the earliest line on the whole mattress, written where the head of the bed had been, where a boy lying on his back with his arms up could reach. "Mom says the tea is for my brain. It is not." He did not call Delaney. That was the first decision, and he made it in about 4 seconds, sitting on the floor with his hand flat on the words. And later, when people asked him how he'd known, he would say honestly that he hadn't known anything. He'd only noticed that his wife had spent 8 months keeping this exact object in this exact room, and that a stranger had crossed himself over it, and that when you hear 2 notes that shouldn't be in the same chord, you don't ask one of them for an explanation. He photographed it. He was methodical about it, because being methodical was the only thing holding him together. He shot the whole surface in a grid from a stepladder, then close on every date, every drawing, the boots, the van, the tally columns. 61 photographs. Then he went down the front steps into the September sun and asked Amato Sarmiento to please tell him what he had seen. Amato was leaning on the tailgate with a cup of gas station coffee going cold in his hand. He said, "My nephew was a boy like that. In Danbury." He wrote on the wall behind his headboard, small, so nobody sees. Amato tapped his own temple. They write it where nobody looks, because they are not allowed to say it out loud. Then he looked at Beck for a long moment and said the thing that Beck would repeat to a federal grand jury 11 months later. He said, "Sir, I have moved that mattress before." Beck said, "This mattress." Amato said no, and then, tilting his head, "Maybe." He said, "We do a route. 6, 7 times a year, the company gets a work order from a medical office. Pick up a mattress from a house, deliver it to another house, and the paperwork is not a delivery ticket. It's a form with a number on it, and we are told not to unwrap them." Kip, who had gone the color of skim milk, said, "The plastic ones." Amato said, "The plastic ones." Beck drove to Kittering Elementary and signed Ellis out at 10:52 in the morning with a lie about a dentist. The boy came down the hall with his backpack on both shoulders and his eyes on the floor tiles. In the truck, Beck did not start the engine. He said, "Ellis, I moved your bed today." And Ellis Halloran, who had not volunteered a full sentence to his father in over a year, went absolutely still, and then began to cry so hard he couldn't breathe. And between the sounds he got out 4 words, which were, "You weren't supposed to." They drove to the Kittering Police Department. It took 2 hours and 11 minutes to get from the front counter to somebody who mattered, and Beck would say afterward that those 2 hours were the worst of the entire ordeal, worse than the hearings, worse than the night in the parking lot, because he sat there with 61 photographs on his phone and a 10-year-old under his arm and watched a desk sergeant decide he was a divorcing man building a custody case. That was the phrase the sergeant used. Building a case. Beck did not raise his voice. He asked, politely, twice, for a detective. The third time he laid the phone on the counter with the picture of "If you find this, I am not asleep," filling the screen, and he said, "I'm not leaving this building, and you can decide how that goes." The detective's name was Antonia Beaufort. She was 53, 17 years in crimes against children, and she had the specific tiredness of someone who has heard every version of every story and still shows up. She looked at 4 photographs, and then she stopped looking at the phone and started looking at the boy, and she asked Ellis if he'd like a chair with wheels, and he said yes, and that was the beginning. What Ellis told her over the next 6 days, in 3 interviews at the County Advocacy Center with a woman named Priscilla, who had a puppet and infinite patience, came out sideways and in pieces, the way it does. It began when he was 7. His mother started giving him a drink at night, in a small glass with a blue plastic base so it wouldn't tip, and she called it his tea, and she made a ritual of it, and it tasted like burnt oranges. After the tea he would get heavy. Not sleepy, heavy. He was specific about that, like being at the bottom of the pool. He could hear, he could not move much, and he could not talk, and it lasted a long time, and he had no way to measure it. So at some point, and he could not say when, he started counting. And a man came. Not every night. Some weeks 3 times, some weeks not at all. He came after the house was quiet, and Ellis knew the sound of the front door because it stuck, and then boots on the stairs, and the boots had square toes and 4 eyelets, and Ellis had memorized them because when you're on your back and you can't turn your head, boots are what you get. The man wore gloves. He put something cold and tight on Ellis's arm above the elbow. He took blood, 3 vials, the boy said, sometimes 4, and he clipped a thing to his finger with a red light in it, and he put stickers with wires on his chest, and he wrote on a tablet. He talked while he worked, cheerful and low, the way you talk to a dog. He called him Buddy. He always said the same thing at the end, which was, "That's the whole thing, buddy, easy money." And it took, from the cold on his arm to the boots going back down the stairs, about 90 seconds, and Ellis knew that, because after the first year, he could count it exactly. His mother stood in the doorway. She never came in. He could see her feet. He started writing because of a Saturday in October when he tried to tell her, in the car, what he remembered, and she pulled over and held his face and told him he had a sickness in his sleep that made his brain invent things, and that if he told anyone, they would take him to a hospital and keep him. He was 7. He believed her, so he did the only thing a 7-year-old with a carpenter's pencil could do, which was to lie on his back in the dark, push up on the slats, and write where nobody looks. The talks came back on day 9, from hair, in segments, and it read like a calendar. The compound was not on any schedule. It was a synthetic analog of a plant alkaloid, sold in bulk as a research chemical, with a sedative hypnotic profile roughly 4 times the potency of the over-the-counter thing it was pretending to be. And it was present in Ellis Halloran's hair in a repeating pattern going back 31 months. Beaufort's evidence tech found something else too. When they cut the mattress open at the lab, sewn flat into the underside of the ticking, under a stitched flap the width of a paperback, was a laminated pad the size of a dinner plate with a coiled cable, a lithium cell, and a serial number, and a small printed logo of a crescent moon inside a circle. The moon belonged to the Halbrook Institute for Pediatric Sleep, a 2-story converted bank building on the north edge of Kittering that everyone in town called the Ledge, because of the stone shelf that ran around the 2nd floor. Its founder and medical director was Dr. Cyrus Halbrook, 46, who had a warm television voice, a beard going handsome gray, and a 9-minute talk about childhood sleep debt that had been viewed 4 million times. He sat on 2 hospital boards. He had personally donated the scoreboard at the middle school. And for the last 4 years he had been sleeping with Delaney Halloran, which Beck learned from a folder of hotel folios, the way you learn most things in this life, which is to say, too late and all at once. sitting in a police conference room with a paper cup of terrible coffee while a woman he'd never met turned pages toward him. They had met when Delaney brought Ellis in for a consult about night terrors that, it would turn out, had never happened. The affair started 11 weeks later. But the affair, and this is the part Beck could never make anyone at a dinner party understand, was not the crime. The affair was the recruitment. Halbrook was running a study. That was the word he used in every email, and he used it thousands of times. And he ran it with the vocabulary of legitimate research and none of the substance. A supplement company in Nevada called Numera Wellness wanted a pediatric dosing curve for a compound they intended to market as a children's sleep aid, and real trials on children are slow and expensive and full of people who say no. Halbrook offered them something faster. 41 children, in their own homes, in their own beds, dosed by their own parents, monitored by a telemetry pad sewn into a mattress, and a physician who came at night for blood. He called the parents caregiver partners. He paid them $4,000 a month. He had an ethics approval on file from an outfit called the Meridian Independent Review Board, which was a mail drop in a strip plaza in Henderson, Nevada, and a retired dentist who signed whatever came in for $600 a page. And the mattresses moved. That was the elegance of it and the thing that eventually broke him. Each pad was expensive, and each pad was registered. So when a child aged out of the protocol, or when a parent got nervous, or when a family moved, the mattress went into plastic wrap and onto a truck, and into another house, and the work orders went out to a small local mover that never asked questions, and the mover was Sarmiento and Sons. Delaney came home from Columbus on Thursday to a house with a police seal on one door, and no husband and no son in it. Beck had filed for emergency custody at 4:40 the previous afternoon. She had a lawyer by 8 the next morning, which was faster than any innocent person has ever obtained a lawyer. And the lawyer was very good, and the first 6 weeks belonged entirely to them. Here is how the system fails, and I want to be precise about it. Because the reason this story has the ending it has is that Beckett Halloran spent those 6 weeks learning exactly where the machine had no teeth. The compound was not a controlled substance, so the drug charges were not drug charges. The parents had all signed consent, so the assault charges got complicated. Halbrook had never once written a prescription, never billed insurance, never touched a hospital's records, so no medical board had jurisdiction over what he did on his own time in other people's houses. Numera Wellness was a Nevada LLC with a registered agent and no employees, and Meridian IRB, on paper, had approved everything. The family court did what family courts do, which is split the difference in the name of the child. Delaney Halloran was granted supervised visitation pending the criminal investigation, and then, in November, after her attorney produced 2 therapists and a letter from her mother, and a very effective 40 minutes on the stand in which she wept, and described postpartum anxiety, and a controlling husband who worked 11-hour days, supervised became unsupervised Wednesdays. Beck sat in that courtroom and listened to a woman he had slept beside for 13 years explain that his son's writing was a symptom of the boy's disorder, that children with parasomnias confabulate, that she had been begging her husband for years to take the sleep issues seriously, and he had wanted to fix it with a credit card. She used that line. She used his own sentence, the one she had made, and the magistrate wrote something down. Outside, in the parking lot, Delaney walked past him to her car and stopped and said, quietly, without any heat at all, "You should have left it alone, Beck." And then, because she could never not be quick, it was the most comfortable he ever slept. He did not say anything. He stood there in the wind, with his hands in his coat pockets for a very long time, and what he was doing, though nobody watching would have known it, was the thing his father did in the middle of a job. He was listening for the thing that wasn't happening, and what wasn't happening was this. In 11 weeks, not one other family had come forward. 41 children, and 40 parents were still silent, because 40 parents had signed and cashed and stood in doorways, which meant that no prosecutor in Ohio was going to build this case out of victims. So Beck stopped waiting for one to, and started building it out of furniture. He began with the only thing he genuinely owned in this fight, which was the trade. A piano is a machine for making a small sound very large. That is all it is. A felt hammer strikes a string. The string vibrates almost silently. and a bridge carries that vibration into a spruce soundboard. And the soundboard, because it is broad and thin and under tension, moves enough air to fill a church. Beckett Halloran had built and rebuilt 46 soundboards. He knew, better than almost anyone alive, how to take a whisper and make it carry. And a mattress, he realized, standing in his cold shop at 2 a.m. with the evidence photographs taped up across the wall of the rebuilding bay, is a soundboard that a man is standing on. The plan took 9 weeks to build, and it had 4 parts, and he wrote none of it down. The first part was Amado Sarmiento. Beck drove to the moving company's yard in Warrensville with a thermos and sat on an upturned crate for 3 hours while Amado worked, and at the end of it, Amado went into the office trailer and came back with a fistful of yellow carbon copies from a drawer that nobody had cleaned out since 2019. Every work order the company had ever run for the Halbrook Institute. Pickup address, delivery address, date, and a 6-character asset code stenciled on each wrapped item. 19 mattresses, 63 moves. 4 states, because 2 families had relocated and Halbrook had paid to follow them, to Michigan and to western Pennsylvania. Amado laid them out on the hood of the truck and said, "Sir, I carried these up the stairs." Beck said, "So did their parents." Amado said, "No." And then, after a moment, "Yes." The second part was Bevan Trask, the Institute's night intake nurse, 31, who had worked there for 2 years and who had, 4 times, filed an internal concern form about the home protocol and been told each time that she did not have the training to evaluate research. Beck did not approach her. He knew better. Instead, he got himself hired, through a fine arts dealer he'd known for a decade, to rebuild the action on the Halbrook Institute's lobby grand, a neglected Baldwin that Cyrus Halbrook liked to play badly at donor events. He worked in that lobby for 11 days. He was invisible in the way tradesmen are invisible. He learned the badge system, the alarm zones, the fact that the second-floor east wing had 4 overnight rooms and 1 door that was propped with a fire extinguisher every night at 9 because the badge reader was broken. And on day 8, Bevan Trask sat down on the bench beside him during her break and said, "You're the piano man." And then, 4 minutes later, without either of them acknowledging what was happening, she said, "They take the mattresses back when a kid ages out. They wipe the pads in the basement. He's been talking about closing the home arm since October." The third part was Junie Ballard. Beck found her in the carbons. Asset code 04KRT9 had gone to a house on Sabin Road in 2021 and had come back out of that house in March of 2023 on a work order marked, in a different hand, return, no redelivery. He drove to Sabin Road on a Saturday in December and knocked on the door of Warren and Corinne Faubert. And Corinne Faubert opened it, and Beck said, "My name is Beckett Halloran, and I think our children slept on the same bed." Junie Ballard Faubert had been 8 years old. She had died in her sleep on the 9th of March, 2023, and the county had recorded it as a seizure disorder of unknown etiology, and there had been no autopsy toxicology beyond a standard panel, because nobody orders an exotic panel on a child with a documented seizure history. And the documented seizure history had been documented, over 18 months, by Dr. Cyrus Halbrook. Corinne Faubert had taken the money for 14 months. She said so in the first 10 minutes, before Beck asked, sitting at her kitchen table with her hands flat in front of her. And then she said the sentence that Beck carried around for the rest of his life. She said, "He told me it was the same as a vitamin, and I wanted it to be, because we were $9,000 behind on the house." Then she got up and went to the garage and came back with a plastic tub, Junie's things. And in the tub, folded, cut out with kitchen scissors in a ragged rectangle, was a piece of mattress ticking about 2 feet square, gray with pencil, because Junie had written on hers too. Junie's square was different from Ellis's, and the difference was what finally made this a case instead of a tragedy. She hadn't written sentences. She'd written a list, in the round, deliberate letters of a second grader, of the things the man said, because Junie Ballard had been the kind of child who collected phrases the way other kids collect rocks. There were 19 of them. "Easy money, buddy. Big arm, little pinch. Don't tell your dad, he worries. Mom's right there, see? And, 4 times, circled. Meridian says it's fine." A little girl who had never in her life read a document had written down the name of the fake ethics board because a man had said it in her bedroom to make her mother stop asking questions. Beck drove home with the tub on the passenger seat and did not turn on the radio. Now, the fourth part of the plan. And to explain it, I have to explain what Beck had been building for 6 weeks in the back bay of Halloran and Son, under a tarp, next to a disassembled 1911 upright. He built a mattress. Not a copy exactly, a reconstruction. He'd measured the original at the evidence lab under Beaufort's supervision, and photographed the stitching, and bought 4 yards of the same jacquard ticking from a jobber in North Carolina. Inside, where the foam should have been, he built the thing he actually knew how to build. A 1/4-inch spruce soundboard, quarter sawn, ribbed and crowned exactly as he would crown one for an upright, floated on a frame of laminated poplar so it touched nothing rigid. A bridge running its length, and clamped to that bridge 4 contact transducers, the kind used to amplify an acoustic guitar, wired to a lithium pack and a cellular transmitter in a cavity under the foot, where a hand pressing the surface would feel only firm foam. The physics were not complicated, and they were completely decisive. A microphone in a room hears a room, which is to say, it hears a refrigerator and a furnace and a highway. A soundboard under a bed does not hear the room. It hears the floor, and the frame, and the wall, and every voice in that space, arriving as vibration through structure. And because the board is broad and thin and under tension, it collects all of it and hands it to the transducers at a signal-to-noise ratio no hidden microphone on earth could match. Beck tested it in the shop by whispering from the far corner with a box fan running. He could hear himself swallow. He aged the ticking with weak tea and a heat gun. He sewed a flap in the underside, and into the flap he set a dead telemetry pad, purchased for $200 from a liquidator of medical surplus, with the crescent moon logo peeled from a photograph and reprinted at a sign shop, and stenciled on the border tape, in the same font as the carbons, the asset code 11BWK4. And on the underside, in carpenter pencil, in his own left hand because his right was too recognizable, he wrote nothing at all. That was deliberate. That mattress had to be innocent. The trigger came on the 4th of February, and it came from Delaney, and it very nearly ended everything. Halbrook had been closing the home arm since October. Bevan Trask had said so, and the carbons said so. 3 mattresses recovered in 9 weeks. But he had a problem, and his problem was Ellis Halloran, a subject with 31 months of data, and an open criminal file, and a father taking photographs. And so Cyrus Halbrook did the thing that clever men do when a witness becomes inconvenient, which is not to silence the witness but to relabel him. On February 4th, Delaney Halloran signed a voluntary admission for her son to a 14-day inpatient sleep stabilization program at the Halbrook Institute, effective the following Wednesday, her Wednesday, and under Ohio law, with shared legal custody and no finding yet entered, one parent's signature was enough to walk a child through that door. 14 days inside a building owned by the man in the boots. 14 days of a chart written by that man, at the end of which Ellis Halloran would exist on paper as a child, with a documented, physician-observed parasomnia and confabulatory episodes, and every word he had ever written on the underside of his bed would be a symptom. Beck's lawyer said they could move to stay it. She also said the earliest hearing was the 20th, so he had 11 days, and he used them like a man who had spent his life working to a deadline set by a wedding date and a rented hall. He did not fight the admission. That was the whole move, and it took him a night to accept it. He let it stand. He told Delaney's attorney, in writing, that he objected but would not obstruct. He told Beaufort what he was doing, and she told him, on the record, that she could not authorize any of it. And then she told him, off the record, what the federal task force in Cleveland needed in order to open the door. And that list was 4 items long, and Beck had 2 of them. Then he made 3 phone calls. The first was to Corinne Faubert, who drove to Cleveland on the 11th of February and sat for 6 hours with 2 FBI agents and an assistant United States attorney, and told them about her daughter, and gave them the square of ticking, and signed a consent to exhume, which she had been asking the county for 11 months to let her do. The second was to Bevan Trask, and it was 30 seconds long, and all Beck said was, on the 18th, don't cover the night shift. She said, why? He said, because I don't want you in the building. She was quiet, and then she said, "Okay." And then she said, "The east door, the extinguisher, 9 o'clock." And she hung up. The third was to Amado Sarmiento, who took a work order over the phone on the 14th of February from a woman at the Halbrook Institute who wanted a subject mattress collected from a residence on Wexley Street and delivered to the ledge on the 17th, ahead of the boy's admission, because the protocol required environmental consistency. That was Halbrook's phrase. It had always been Halbrook's phrase, and Delaney had been repeating it in Beck's kitchen for 3 years. The mattress Amado's truck collected from the Halloran house on the 17th of February was not the mattress from the evidence lab. It was the one with the spruce soundboard. Here is what the Halbrook Institute received on the 17th, in plastic wrap, with the correct asset code on the border tape. A 9-inch instrument, weighing 61 pounds, containing no microphone that any sweep would find as a microphone, tuned by a man who had spent 31 years making small sounds enormous. Amado carried the foot. He carried it up the stairs of the ledge and into room 4 of the east wing, and he set it down, and he took off his cap in the hallway, and then he went out to the truck and cried for 11 minutes with his hands on the wheel. On the 18th of February, Ellis Halloran did not go to the Halbrook Institute. He went with his Aunt Marguerite, Beck's sister, to a farmhouse outside Bellefontaine with 2 dogs and no cell service, along with a court-appointed guardian ad litem who had, 4 days earlier, read Junie Ballard's list and stopped being neutral. What went into room 4 at 7 that evening, under a comforter, in the dark, with the lamp off and a note on the door reading "Subject asleep, do not disturb," was a duffel bag packed with 40 pounds of grain, a chemical hand warmer taped inside a folded towel, and, on the pillow, a child's knitted hat that Beck had bought at a drugstore that afternoon. It had to hold for 90 seconds. That was the number. Ellis had given them the number 3 years earlier, on the underside of his bed. Beck was not in the building. He was 400 yards away in the cab of a moving truck with Amado, a laptop, and a set of studio headphones, and beside them, in an unmarked sedan, were 2 special agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and an assistant U.S. attorney named Ozella Kirkbride who had, that morning, obtained a warrant, and it is worth saying clearly that the recording that follows was made lawfully, with consent, in a room where the subject of the recording had no expectation of privacy that any court has ever recognized, because the man who owned that room was not a party to the mattress. At 9:14 p.m., the east door opened. Boots on stairs. Beck heard it in his teeth, not through the air, through the structure, the way the whole building told the soundboard what was happening. A door bar, 4 steps, a landing, 12 steps, a floor going quiet under weight, then a second, lighter set, then a voice, and it was his wife's, and she said, "He's out, he had it at 7, and Cyrus Halbrook said, "That's my girl." They were in that room for 6 minutes and 40 seconds, and they said everything. They said it because they had said it 100 times in 100 bedrooms, and nothing had ever happened. Halbrook talked while he sat up, cheerful, low, the way you talk to a dog. He said the Faubourg woman was making noise and it didn't matter because Meridian's file was clean. He said, when Delaney asked whether they should stop, that they were 40 days from the Numira handoff, and that after the handoff, none of it was his problem, it was Nevada's problem. He talked about Junie Ballard by name. He said the word titration. He said, and this is the sentence that Ozella Kirkbride would read aloud to a jury with her reading glasses in her hand. "We've been over this, Dell. The little Ballard girl had a bad heart and a mother who couldn't count." And Delaney Halloran laughed. Not a big laugh, a small one, the kind you give a colleague. Then Halbrook said, "All right, buddy. Big arm, little pinch." And there was a rustle of a comforter, and a pause of perhaps 4 seconds, and then Cyrus Halbrook said, in a completely different voice, "What is this?" He got 9 seconds. He made it to the door. The east wing of the Halbrook Institute was entered at 9:22 p.m. Delaney Halloran was arrested in the second-floor corridor with a phlebotomy kit in her hand. Cyrus Halbrook was arrested on the stone ledge outside the east window, where he had climbed out and gotten 30 feet along the building before he realized that the ledge went nowhere, and he sat down on it, and he waited. And when the agents brought him back in through the window, he asked, twice, whether the recording had been consented to. They took the mattress out that night. Amado Sarmiento was not permitted to carry it. He stood in the parking lot in the cold and watched 4 federal evidence technicians carry a piano soundboard down the front steps of a bank building, and he crossed himself again, and this time he told Beck it was for a different reason. The rest is arithmetic, and I'm going to give you the numbers, because the numbers are the point. The exhumation of Junie Ballard Faubert was performed on the 2nd of March. Segmental hair analysis and preserved vitreous fluid established the compound at 4 times the concentration ever administered to any adult in any published trial, and the cause of death was amended from seizure disorder of unknown etiology to acute respiratory depression due to sedative hypnotic toxicity, and the manner was amended from natural to homicide. Corinne Faubert asked to be present. She was. The federal indictment ran to 61 counts. Conspiracy to distribute an unapproved new drug with intent to defraud. Wire fraud, because the Meridian approvals crossed state lines. Obstruction. And, brought by the state of Ohio and tried in Kittering, involuntary manslaughter, and 39 counts of endangering children, 1 for every child on the carbons. 19 mattresses came out of 19 houses. 14 of them had writing on the underside. Not all of it was words. One of them, belonging to a 6-year-old in Erie, Pennsylvania, was covered edge to edge with drawings of the same square-toed boot. Cyrus Halbrook was convicted on 54 counts and sentenced to 41 years without parole. His attorney argued at sentencing that the institute had helped thousands of children sleep, and the judge said that she had listened to 6 minutes and 40 seconds of him working, and that she had never in 19 years on the bench heard a man be so bored while committing a felony against a child. Meridian Independent Review Board turned out to be a retired dentist named Gilbert Loudermilk, who had signed 412 protocols in 6 years and read none of them, and who took a plea and 11 years. Numera Wellness dissolved in 9 days, and its 2 principals were extradited from Nevada. The chief executive got 19 years, the chemist got 14. Osgood Quist, Delaney's brother, who had compounded the syrup in the back of the family pharmacy in Ashtabula and labeled it as a magnesium supplement, got 16. Verity Quist, who had known for at least 2 years and had told her daughter to be careful about texts, was charged and pled to a count of complicity and got 3. Delaney Halloran was offered a deal in April and refused it, because Delaney had never in her life met a room she didn't think she could talk into. She testified in her own defense for 2 days. She was very good. She cried at the correct moments, and she explained the affair as coercion, and the money as a stipend, and the tea as a supplement, and then Ozella Kirkbride stood up and played 6 minutes and 40 seconds, and on the 7th day the jury took 90 minutes, which Beck's sister pointed out later was 90 of something for a change. She got 24 years. Her parental rights were terminated in November. At the termination hearing, she asked for 1 minute to address her son, and the court granted it, and Ellis, who was 11 by then, was asked whether he wanted to be in the room, and he said no, and then he changed his mind and said he wanted to be in the room, but he didn't want to talk, and that is what happened. She said a great many things in that minute. When it was over, the judge asked Ellis if he wanted to say anything, and he shook his head, and then he leaned over to his father and whispered something, and Beck stood up and said, "Your Honor, my son asks me to tell you that he counted, and it was 58 seconds, and he says she was faster than the other one." Nobody in that courtroom said anything for a while. Amado Sarmiento testified for 2 hours in federal court and 40 minutes in state court and never once used the word hero, and when a reporter used it he said, "Ma'am, I carried it up the stairs 63 times. He retired the following spring. The moving company is now Sarmiento and Daughters, run by his oldest, and it does not accept medical work orders. Bevan Trask, who had filed 4 concern forms into a void, was the government's second witness and now teaches a required ethics module for sleep technologists in 3 states, and it is built around a form nobody read. The ledge sold at auction. It is a public library branch now, and the second-floor east wing is the children's section, which was Corinne Faubert's idea, and which some people found macabre, and which Beck thought was exactly right, because a room does not remember anything. Only people do, and would. Beckett Halloran reopened the shop that summer. The sign still says Halloran and Son. He gets a lot of calls now from people who saw him on the news and want their grandmother's spinet looked at, and he takes about a third of them, and he is home by 5. Ellis started talking again in stages. The way a soundboard comes back under tension, slow and then all at once. He is 13 now. He plays badly and loudly and with enormous joy, which his father says is the correct way to play at 13. He testified at exactly one hearing and has not been asked to do anything since, which was the entire point. Beck built him a piano, not restored, built. Over 14 months, a small upright in cherry with a spruce board Beck crowned by hand, and when it was finished, he did the thing he'd been planning since the day the evidence lab released the property. He cut a rectangle out of the underside of the original mattress ticking, the piece with the 4-inch letters, and he asked Ellis what he wanted done with it, and he said he would burn it in the yard if that was the answer. Ellis thought about it for 2 days. Then he said he wanted it inside the piano. So it is glued to the inside of the lid, face in, where you can only see it if you open the top all the way, which you do about twice a year when the instrument needs tuning. It sits over the soundboard. Every note that boy has played since he was 11 has gone through that piece of cloth on its way out of the box. His father says you can't hear it. His father says that's not the point. I've been sitting with this one for a while, and here's what won't leave me alone. Everybody in this story had information. The mother had all of it. The doctor had all of it. The pharmacist brother had most of it. The grandmother had enough of it. And 40 other parents had exactly as much of it as Corinne Faubert did. The only person in the entire arrangement who had none of the information, who couldn't read a consent form or Google a compound or call a lawyer, was a 7-year-old lying on his back in the dark. And he was the only one who wrote anything down. Think about that for a second. 40 adults kept a secret for 3 years, and one child, with a carpenter's pencil and nothing else on earth, kept a record. Not because he thought it would save him. He was 7. He didn't think anybody was coming. He wrote it because the alternative was that it never happened at all, and some instinct older than he was told him that a thing that is written down is harder to unhappen. That instinct was right. It ended a criminal enterprise in 4 states. So if I'm taking anything out of this, it's 2 things, and the second one matters more than the first. The first is that people who insist nothing in a room may change are usually protecting the room, not the person in it. Be very interested in anyone who tells you not to move the furniture. And the second is that a child who goes quiet is not calmer. Quiet is not the absence of a problem. It's a sound the problem is making, and you have to learn to hear it. And most of us are 3 years late. Beckett Halloran spent his life listening to instruments, and it still took a stranger in work gloves setting down a mattress on a staircase to make him listen to his own house. If you're lucky, you get a stranger. If you're not, you get the pencil marks, and you get them years too late, and you spend the rest of your life doing what that man did in the parking lot, which is standing very still, and finally hearing the thing that isn't happening. Thanks for staying to the end of this one. Go flip something over.